Well, welcome to the Church Street campus of Layton High and our discussion of The Hobbit. In fact, today we're going to be telling you a good deal of the story. This is May the 7th, Thursday, May the 7th, and I'm going to give you the story today, and also we'll be posting the quotes. On Monday the 11th, I'll finish the story, and we'll read through the quotes on Wednesday the 13th, and then and give you the test, and we'll finish that up on the 15th. So this will probably be our last great book together. I'm sorry we didn't get to hear all of your great books, but I think this is a great one for us to end on. I hope you will be inspired to read it and not rely on any movies or any other versions of it, not even mine, but experience the joy of reading it yourself and launch yourself on a lifelong love of J.R.R. Tolkien and his books. You notice I've invited some of our little friends from the art book room to be with us today. I hope they add to our ambiance as we move ahead. So again, we're going to go through The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. We know his face now, and we know our hero Bilbo as he walks out through the door. You know, he has that great poem about how every journey begins with the first step, and this is the door where it began. As you read The Hobbit, you'll read that beautiful poem that's kind of at the center of his heart as he returns to Bag End at the end. And so it will be in the quotes, and we'll get to know it. Here is the original cover to the book, which I've talked about. And you can see in it the journey through the mountains, to the lonely mountain in the great distance. That's as far as this story goes, is to the lonely mountain. There are eagles and dragons and forests and adventures enormous as he passes on his way to find this great treasure that he's going to be asked to help to rescue for the dwarves. But of course, as we know, he finds an even greater and more important treasure anyway to, in the end, save the world. And we'll talk about that someday, I hope. But it all begins one day when a very happy Bilbo Baggins, he just turned 50, which is nice, comfortable age to be as a hobbit. He is a bachelor. He lives in his hobbit hole at Bag End, there at the end of the cul-de-sac, a beautiful home. He's a rich, well-established, wealthy person with gardeners and others to take care of him, but he lives alone and is very happy with it. You can see him blowing a ring of smoke here when who should appear outside his gate and at his door but Gandalf. And Gandalf is known to Bilbo. He's been famous, especially for his fireworks, but he's a wanderer who comes around, poking around a lot. Of course, Bilbo knows very little about him, other than he's heard of him and he perhaps even seen him and been curious. Now, an important thing to know about Bilbo Baggins is his mother was a Took, and that means that he has Took blood. And Tooks are not like other hobbits. As we will read in our quotes, Tooks are adventurous. Tooks are full of desire to find new things, and Tooks make natural leaders. And so Bilbo is kind of torn between his rich, comfortable Baggins roots and his want to go on adventure Took roots. And it's kind of fun how they pull on him. You know, I have a great experience on that I have to share with you. When I was in Hawaii learning Japanese, after about 2 months, we were almost at the end of what they used to call the language training mission. And I was having my share of struggles, I have to admit. But I made many great friends. But the very best one, we were in the morning, we were in the restroom, the big common shower and shaving den together, preparing. And he knew I loved the Lord of the Rings and Tolkien, and especially The Hobbit. And he just turned to me with his eyes glinting, and he says, the Baggins in me is scared to death, but the Took in me can't wait to go. And so for the rest of my mission, I rode on my Took half and had a great adventure there. Have for my whole life, and I hope you will too. Find the Took in you. But Bilbo is very polite to Gandalf and invites him into tea. But Gandalf isn't interested in tea. He just talks to Bilbo for a little bit, kind of confirms who he is. And then after Bilbo goes back in the house, Gandalf marks the door. That's something that they used to do in the olden days. When my dad was young, wandering around as a hobo, people would mark people's gates and doors if they were generous, and they would give people things who knocked on the door and begged. And he knew all the different symbols and would tell them to me because he was a bit of a hobo riding around on the trains for a while. It was a hard life my dad lived, and he made sure mine was better, and I'm grateful for that. But it was my mother that introduced me to reading, I have to admit that, and what a great adventure that's been. So, what did the marks on the door mean? Well, there were a group of dwarves that were coming there because Gandalf wants them all to meet. And he sent out to all these different dwarves, and interestingly enough, there are 13 dwarves under the leadership of Thorin, who is heir to be king under the mountain, though his kingdom is in the hands of Smaug the dragon, who has driven out the original king, and there have been many adventures, which you'll read about if you read all of Tolkien. But in his adventures, Gandalf has come across these members of the upper families of those who were driven out from under the mountain, and he's bringing them all together in, of all places, a hobbit hole. Now, of course, they think that it's kind of like coming into a hotel and they're going to be taken care of. And so when they get there, they start demanding food of all types. And before long, poor Bilbo, who has a very chubby larder, lots of food in it, lots of good things to share, is serving out all his food. And you'll notice Gandalf puffing away on his pipe, blowing smoke rings, and the dwarves eating and gobbling and everything. And Bilbo is about to go crazy. But in the book, once they feasted, then they start to clean up for Bilbo. They do a marvelous job cleaning up, and they sing songs as they clean. And I found as a kid working at camp, again, a lot of my camp adventures are going to come in here, I'm sorry, that if you sing while you're doing dishes, they go a lot quicker. We quote Money, 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 Money. Gushnik is a very good song to sing while you're scrubbing with the soapy pad. But they sing and they have a lot of fun with him. They make up the songs about Bilbo as they go along. And then their songs go into the songs of the elder days and the ancient times and of their adventures and of dragons and of gold. Of course, dwarves are very, very interested in gold and jewels and treasure, more than even men, and definitely more than elves, who love these things and like these things because they're beautiful, but they have a different feeling towards them than the dwarves do, as we'll talk about a little bit later. But they also value them. And Bilbo becomes enchanted by their songs and by the stories that they're telling. And then they explain to him that they want him to go with them on the journey to retrieve their treasure from under the mountain. And Gandalf explains to the dwarves that he's selected Mr. Baggins to be their burglar. He's going to be this sneaky, get in and snatch things and find things for them person, though Bilbo has never thought of himself as a burglar. But his took side is burning, and Gandalf gets him all excited. And what's more important is 13 is an unlucky number, and so Gandalf explains that they have to have a 14th man, and so the 14th will be the Hobbit Bilbo. And so after this is over, they all grab another snack and go to bed, and Bilbo goes back to his little room. It's a very big house. It's a mansion. It looks like a little hillside, but it's all filled with beautiful paneled corridors and beautiful rockwork and everything, and downstairs larders and all kinds of good stuff. And so Bilbo goes to bed, and when he wakes up, it's late in the morning. And so he jumps out of bed and he reads the note, and the house is perfectly clean and everything's made right, and the dwarves have gone. And so he runs down the road, and his big thing that he makes of it all the time is he ran off without even getting his pocket handkerchief. Can you imagine going somewhere without a pocket handkerchief? Not for a hobbit and not for me. And I always carry one, and I hope you do too. So he runs down the road, and he does catch up with them, and they have a pony, and they borrow a cloak for him. And before he knows it, he's riding through the Shire with the dwarves and with Gandalf, who's telling him more and more about the excitement of their adventure. But they come, after some time, they come to a cross in the river, and Gandalf tells them that he has to go off on some other business. Now, once we get the Lord of the Rings published, we know the business that Gandalf keeps leaving to deal with, and it's trying to negotiate with Saruman to overthrow Sauron, and they're hoping to set up a council that will keep the Dark Lord from rising again in Mordor. But none of those things do we or the hobbits or the dwarves even have any comprehension of. But Gandalf has many irons in the fire. And so he leaves the dwarves to go on, and they don't know it, but they're pretty much under the leadership of Bilbo, and even Bilbo doesn't know that, so they travel on. And then it begins to rain and storm, which is often the case, and they're camped out very uncomfortably without much good food to eat, and in the middle of the night, and they look up through the trees, and dang, what do they see? They see a fire. So of course they're all afraid to go and explore, so they tell Bilbo that that's his job, to go and explore and see what happens. And so Bilbo goes up through the trees, and it's 3 great big giant trolls. And trolls are powerful creatures, which we will eventually learn were made by Morgoth, who is the devil, to be a mockery of the Ents, who we'll also meet when we read The Lord of the Rings. But the trolls there are feasting on mutton, because they're slaughtering mutton, and they eat anything, including people, including dwarves they particularly like. And so they're sitting there, they're fed full on mutton right now, and they're sitting around their fire complaining about that's all they get to eat. And Bilbo is spying on him and just getting ready to go back and warn his friends, when danged if one of the dwarves don't step right into the fire. And before we know it, all 13 dwarves are captured. But luckily for them, the trolls get in an argument about how they should kill them and how they should cook them. And Bilbo, of course, is watching all of this and very upset and concerned and fearful when they keep arguing and arguing. And what is happening is Gandalf is pretending to be one of them. And they have all kinds of fun. And they're still arguing when the sun comes up. And remember, when the sun rises, the trolls have to be underground or they turn into stone. And so the trolls turn into stone. And that Gandalf then takes them, and they go up the trail, and they find the very stinky troll cave, and they smack down the door and they go inside. Now, it's a nasty looking place, as the little pockets of words explain here, that this really smells like trolls, and now we know why. Because it's full of not only treasures that they've stolen of all kinds, but their dirty clothes and the dead bones of the humans and other things that they have eaten lying about. But as they go into the troll den and start looking around, they do find some amazing treasures, which, first of all, lots of gold and jewels and stuff, which they take out and bury. And this will eventually end up all going to Bilbo as the reward that the dwarves give him for what he does for them, which you'll find out as you read the book. But at this time, we just think it's hidden. And that's why Bilbo, and then after him Frodo, are extremely wealthy, even though they're not pretentious. They just happily live at Bag End. But they also find some weapons there, including 2 magical swords, big swords, Glamourling and Orcrist, and a little sword. And so Frodo is given the little sword, but Gandalf and Thorin take the big swords. These were swords made by the elves, and how they came to be there, Gandalf cannot imagine how trolls got a hold of them. But these swords are made, they are like nuclear weapon powerful. They're just unbelievably powerful weapons. And so Gandalf will wield his sword through the rest of his service here in Middle-earth, and Thorin will carry his sword throughout his life, as will Bilbo carry it until he gives it to Frodo in The Lord of the Rings, as we know. If we've read that, and if you haven't, you should. And if you should, it doesn't matter that you're forewarned. So now, once they're back together again with Gandalf, who has rescued them, they travel on to one of the most beautiful places that they will see. Not one of the most beautiful places they will see in their entire journey, which is the house of Elrond, half-elven, in the mountains at the foot of the Misty Mountains. And you can see the Misty Mountains in the background. And it's this beautiful canyon with a river running through it. And you can, of course, the elves are full, the forest is full of elves, and they sing, and there's a power of magic there. Of course, we later will learn that Elrond wields one of the 3 elven rings that have never been touched by the hand of Sauron and are therefore sacred and powerful. And Gandalf has one, as we will find out, and so does Galadriel. But we don't know that in The Hobbit. We don't know about these things. We just know that they're in a wonderful place. Now, again, to be critical of the Jackson movies. In the Jackson movies, the elves are stingy and cruel and nasty to the dwarves and not trusting and rude to them. That is so unlike the book, it's painful. They are received with songs and happiness, and they're fed up until they're chubby, and they're just everything. Their horses are, they've lost their ponies because the goblins, no, that's later. But they have all kinds of adventures. Their ponies are made happy again and taken good care of. All kinds of wonderful things happen here in the house of Elrond. And among those things is Elrond, who knows more about Middle-earth than even Gandalf. And he's been here since the fall of Melkor. He looks at the swords, and he can read the runes on them. And he explains to Gandalf and to Thorin what wonderful super weapons they have here. And so that's kind of fun, and they party and they sing. There's so much singing that goes on. And I think maybe at the end of The Hobbit, I might read you my little lecture on the joy of singing in people's lives. But you can see Bilbo is here with the dwarves, and he's so happy here. And I'm just going to throw forward when Bilbo finally does leave the Shire on his 111th birthday, his 111st birthday, this is where he goes to spend the rest of his life, is to Rivendell. So it's a wonderful place. And there are so many wonderful people we don't meet in this story. They're just background, but they're happy elves, and they treat Bilbo so nicely, and all the dwarves with respect. There's no meanness, no anger. That's not in an elf. That's not how they behave. Because elves are, in fact, angels. That's what the word means, and that's where the idea comes from, as Tolkien will reveal to us if we were to read his background material. But here in Rivendell, they find out about their swords, and then Gandalf produces a map, and it has runes on it, and Elrond translates all the runes so that even Thorin will know what the map means, and then he holds it up in the moonlight. And in the moonlight is revealed some moon letters. These are letters that can only be read when the same moon is shining that was shining when they were written. Now, I think writing in secret code is really fun. When I was a kid, we used to take lemon juice and write in lemon juice on paper. I can't even remember the formula, but I think it had a little canned milk in it or something. And then you had to shine it, hold it up to the light, and you could see it. But you could see the moon letters, and the moon letters tells them that when the thrush knocks thrice, then the door will be revealed. The secret door will, and the keyhole will be revealed. And that's very important. And so now Thorin and Bilbo, who pays attention and loves maps, pays attention to all these things. It's the Took in him, of course. The stage is set for a miracle which will occur later on in the story. And so with this new knowledge and with the power of Elrond's support and help and all kinds of new provisions provided because they had lost so much when their horses ran away, and they were nearly starving anyway by that time. They're ponies, they're not horses. Dwarves have to ride ponies, especially hobbits. But they're all taken care of. And after much too early, and none of them want to leave, even though they want to get to the mountain. They're very happy there. They head on off then into the Misty Mountains. Now you have to get through the Misty Mountains before you can get to the Lonely Mountain. And this is like driving through Weber Canyon, I suppose. It's a difficult and dangerous journey. And they're headed up there along a narrow pathway. And as they're going into the mountains one night, they have a terrific storm. It's just unbelievable. And as they watch it, they can see out, and you can see them here in the lightning. There are giants out there throwing things at each other. But the dwarves find a little cave up around the road, and they all go quietly in and they hide in the cave. But it's not just any cave. It's the door to the underground kingdom of the goblins. Now remember, a goblin is the dwarfish word for an orc. An orc is the elven word for a goblin. But these are these terrible creatures that are, they're actually descended from the corrupted elves, corrupted by Sauron. They are mortal. They're not immortal, but they are surely evil and powerful. And I love this picture because it shows the dwarves as kind of dwarfish, and it shows Bilbo at age 50 looking the way I wish I did at age 50. Maybe I did, come to think of it. Well, you'll never know. But anyway, there in the cave that night, they all go to sleep, including Gandalf. He's had some real adventures, which we're not aware of. And suddenly Bilbo has a dream, and in the middle of the dream, the back of the cave is opening up. And he wakes up, and dang if it isn't, and the goblins are coming out of it, because this is their doorstep. This is their front door entrance to their minds. And Bilbo lets out a yelp, and Gandalf wakes up in time to let loose an explosion, and he escapes. And this is very important. If it hadn't been for Bilbo, Gandalf himself might have been caught. We don't know. It would have been a bloody battle, because Gandalf can be destroyed, as we know from the Lord of the Rings. He does die, though he gets to come back. But the point is, Gandalf is able to escape and hide, but not the rest of them. The other 14 are all captured by the goblins, bound up, and marched down into the center of the mountain. And they're not treated nicely, and everything they have of value is taken from them, including these terrible swords, which makes the goblins even more angry. Now, not all dwarfs and all goblins are enemies, and that's why the elves sometimes are a little persnickety on how they behave towards dwarves, but they're never mean, they're never petty. The dwarves, on the other hand, can be, though Thorin and his group are good dwarves, and they don't behave that way. But the point is this: the goblins aren't necessarily enemies to all dwarves. Sometimes they even go in league together. But finding these elven swords makes them very curious. In fact, I don't think they find Sting, because I think Bilbo's got that hidden where they don't see it. But they do take the big sword that Thorin has. So they get down into the mountain, and there they meet the king of the goblins. He's a big giant, and he's sitting on his throne, and he's checking out the sword. And they all hate this sword because it's gone down in legend. As an elven sword, it's slaughtered thousands. It's a terrible, terrible. To them, it's the most evil thing in the world. Whereas to good people, it would be one of the most wonderful good things in the world, because it destroys evil. And just as they're deciding that they're going to kill the dwarves, there's an explosion, and Gandalf comes and he kills the king of the goblins and chases the other goblins away, grabs up the sword, takes the dwarves, and they start running down the corridor following him. It's very different, and of course the goblins soon regroup, and they begin to chase. And that's where Bilbo gets separated from the other dwarves, from the dwarves and from the other group, and from Gandalf. Gandalf knows the way, he knows everything, and he leads them out. And when they get out and they discover Bilbo isn't there, that's when that chapter, which you read a little bit about, begins. But Bilbo doesn't know where he is, and so he starts crawling in the dark. He hasn't yet figured out that his sword will light the way, and he finds the ring, which he puts in his pocket. He then proceeds down, down, down into the heart of the mountain, actually going in the opposite direction from where he should be, missing many corridors that he's aware of because he can sense them, but he can't really see them as he passes down. And then he gets down to a lake down in the very bottom of the cave. And if you've ever been into caves, you know that they often have lakes in the bottom. And out on the lake lives Gollum. They call him Gollum because that's the sound he makes. And he lives down there by killing goblins. So he's no slouch. Of course, it's usually young goblins he kills, and he kills them by sneaking up behind them and strangling them. He doesn't do it in a fair fight. But when he approaches Bilbo pulls out his sword, his little elven sword, and Gollum is afraid of that. And so they have a discussion, and Bilbo wants Gollum to lead him out. And Gollum wants to eat Bilbo, and so they make a deal that who can ever win the riddle game will be able to get their way. And so they play at riddles, but Bilbo is doing very well, much better than Gollum thinks he was going to do. But he's running out of riddles, and at a certain point, he puts his hand in his pocket, and Gollum is demanding that he give a riddle, and he just absent-mindedly says, "What have I got in my pocket?" And Gollum says, "That's not a fair riddle." And Bilbo says, "Yes, it is. It's a fair riddle." And Gollum says, "It's only fair if you give me 3 guesses." And Bilbo says, "Okay, I'll give you 3 guesses." And he actually cheats and does 4 because his last guess he guesses like your hand and something. Then the last guess is string or nothing. And all of them are wrong. And so Bilbo says no. And so Gollum says, "Okay, I'll take you out, but I've got to go back, get something off my island." Well, of course, what he wants to go back to his island to get is the ring, because he's afraid of the sword. But if he gets the ring, he will put it on and be able to sneak up on Bilbo without Bilbo seeing him and kill him. And that's the plan, because he's going to eat Bilbo. So Bilbo's actions are self-defense, and that's justifiable. All things are fair in love and war, as you know. So while he's gone, Bilbo is fretting and nervous, and the ring slips on his finger. Now, we now know that it was the ring's intention to leave the center of the mountain. It had been there since Gollum brought it there hundreds of years before, and now it wants to be free. It wants to get back to its master, Sauron. But we don't know that, not even through the entire Hobbit are we aware of just how important the ring is. But this is what the ring is doing. And so the ring slips on to Bilbo's finger just in time where Gollum returns, and Gollum leads Bilbo out. And then that brings us to the 4 pages which we read, and the reunion of Bilbo with the dwarves and Gandalf. But their luck is not good. Not long after they get reunited, it gets dark, and the goblins come out of the mountain. And they have giant wolves with them, and they follow the trail, and they attack the dwarves. Of course, the dwarves are not slouches, and they fight as best they can, but they're terribly outnumbered. And Gandalf climbs up to the very top of this giant tree and is throwing flames down at the wolves and setting the forest on fire, when suddenly a giant eagle swoops in and grabs him and carries him off, and then does the same to all the dwarves, though Bilbo just has to grab onto one of the dwarves and get carried away. But the eagles carry them out of the forest, because it's not particularly that the eagles love dwarves. It's just that the eagles hate goblins and want to do anything they can to frustrate what they're doing. And so the eagles carry off the hobbit, the wizard, and the 13 dwarves high into the mountains. Now, what's fun about this painting is it's one actually done by J.R.R. Tolkien, and I think it's one of his best. It shows the Misty Mountains, it shows the eagle, and if you look close down there, just behind the eagle, you'll see our Bilbo Baggins up there on the top of the mountain. Of course, this is another artist's rendition showing just how big these giant eagles are. And of course, they're not bald eagles. That's the American eagle. These are more like golden eagles that they would find all around the world, including in America. We have them too. And this is the king of the eagles. And he is hearing their story and figuring out what's going on. And he and Gandalf are actually pretty good friends. Gandalf actually saved his life at one time, and he will save Gandalf's life several times before the adventures of the Ring and of Gandalf in Middle-earth are over. But among the things that this great eagle agrees to do is to take the folks, the members of the party, down to the lands, out of the mountains where they will be safe, and they'll be able to go on adventure together. So they, after they are fed and taken care of by the eagles, they are taken down to a great big farmstead, which is run by a very powerful farmer. His name is Beorn, and he is a shapeshifter or a skin changer. And when he's a man, he's a great big strong man. And when he's a bear, he's a great big strong bear. Now, you know I don't like bears, except the dead one up here on this bookcase behind me. I don't mind it too much. But he just doesn't, he's just usually not a bear. He's usually a man. But animals love him. And he takes very good care of all his animals, particularly his horses he's pleased with. And Gandalf knows if all 15 of them show up at his doorstep, he's going to be a difficult person to be with, and he's not going to be very nice. So he originally just takes Bilbo and shows up. And it's kind of the way the dwarves came to Bilbo's house, a few at a time. They show up at Beorn's house a few at a time, as Bilbo and Gandalf are having snacks with Beorn. Then the dwarves start showing up. And once again, I believe Thorin comes in last. So he lets them stay the night, and then that night he goes out in his bear shape and finds out that all the stories that they told him are true, including the fact that Gandalf has killed the great goblin, and the goblins have long been at war with Beorn and his people. You're kind of frontiersmen. Beorn is kind of like Davy Crockett on steroids, and he's up there, and they're all just... So he does now accept them and agree to help them. He's going to give them horses and to take them to the edge of Mirkwood. Now, Mirkwood is the next great barrier through which they have to pass. And you would think that nothing would be as bad as the Misty Mountains full of goblins. But believe me, Mirkwood is going to be even more dangerous. So this is going to be our last slide for today. But this is a map drawn by J.R.R. Tolkien, not the red lines. I think they are added by another person to show the key points along the way. But you'll see Rivendell is the furthest one to the west. And remember that the west is the freedom. That's where the Shire is. And if you go far enough west, you come to the sea. And then across the sea, you're on your way to heaven. Down in the bottom, just where my square is sitting, you'll see another square, and that's Mordor. And then on the other far side of Mirkwood, you'll see the Lonely Mountain. And so, and the lake, and the river that comes out of the Lonely Mountain and forms the lake. And so there are all kinds of adventures that lie ahead for them. And there are various routes they could take. They could go around the long way, but that's a little more dangerous. They decide to go through the middle, straight through the middle of Mirkwood. And that's what they decided back in the House of Elrond. So they've gone through the Misty Mountains now, and now it's to go through Mirkwood. So next time we get together, we'll pick up here on our journey through Mirkwood. You should have your quotes. You can start reading them and thinking about them. And then we'll finish our adventure through Mirkwood, and we will go through most of the quotes, and then any quotes we haven't finished we'll do on Friday, and we'll present the quiz and its answers. So thank you very much for being with us today, and you have a good, safe couple of days, and we'll see you next week. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Well, scholars, welcome to the Church Street campus of Layton High. Today we're going to finish up our slideshow and quick review. It's not even a decent telling of The Hobbit, but we'll finish that today. And then with the quotes which you've received, you should have a good chance to contemplate things over the weekend. And then next week we're going to review the quotes and have a great time going through The Hobbit. And you do have a quiz which is posted today, which is only 10 questions on the reading, and you need to get those answered and in. So there I've wasted 35 of our precious seconds. I'm here. I've got Miss Mark's beautiful cup with me on it as Gollum, and we'll share our adventures together as we occasionally take a sip of lemon juice if I need it. But thank you for being with us. You remember that we got to the house of Beorn, and Beorn lends them horses to take them to the borders of Mirkwood, with strict instructions that they're to return the horses. Some of the dwarves were ponies. Some of the dwarves want to keep their ponies into the forest, but wisely they don't, and then they see as the horses go running back that the giant bear has followed them. So they'd have all been eaten had they not done it. Gandalf has gone off again, and they're without any leadership other than Thorin, who is the king, but the real leader, as we shall see probably more clearly in the forest than anywhere else, turns out to be Bilbo. So they start into the forest, and it gets darker and deeper the longer the trail. The trail is pretty obvious to follow, but it gets darker and darker the further they go into it. And eventually it's so dark and so deep, and they're so discouraged. It's so stuffy and so frightening, and their eyes watching them at night, and there are spider webs everywhere, and it's scary and dark, that they convince Bilbo to climb up to the top of the tall tree and to look out over the world, which he does, and to his joy he sees butterflies and the beautiful forest top, and in the far distance he can finally spy the lonely mountain, and there's the lake. So he's looked at the maps, he knows they're headed in the right direction, all they need to do is follow. But they've been told not to eat or drink anything they find in the forest, and so their food and water supply is running low, and it's not long before Bombur, who is the biggest of the dwarves, falls into a creek and goes to sleep, and now they're having to carry him, and life is very miserable. He does wake up eventually as they get close to the edge of the forest, though, and as they're approaching the edge of the forest, they see lights back in the woods, and they hear singing. And it's not evil, wicked goblins singing, it's unbelievably beautiful singing. And so they sneak through the forest, hoping to find someone who will help them. And they see these beautiful people, these all young, all beautiful people who are the elves of Mirkwood. They're dark elves. They've never been to heaven, but that doesn't mean they're still not nearly perfect. They're good people. They're singing in the forest, and the dwarves sneak up on them, but they don't particularly like people trespassing in their country, nor do they particularly get along with dwarves all the time, though back in the old days, when Thrain was king under the mountain, they surely did. So there's some tension. Now remember, elves live forever, and so they remember all the dwarves and some of the things that the dwarves don't even remember, and surely not Bilbo. But they're singing in the forest. But when the dwarves try to approach them, poof, the lights all go out, and they keep disappearing and reappearing throughout the night, until finally Thorin jumps right out into the midst of them, and there's a big explosion. He's knocked unconscious and captured by the elves, so we don't find out that till later. And the rest of them run through the forest screaming and yelling, and Bilbo finds himself all alone and lost in the forest. But then begins another great adventure. He lies down to go to sleep that night, and when he wakes up in the morning, there is a spider tying up his legs. Well, the spider doesn't get him all the way tied up. He is very willing to use his sting, or his sword, which he has used before, and he brings it out, and it startles the spider, who runs away, and he cuts his bonds free. And then he goes off into the forest to discover that his now 12 other friends have all been captured by giant spiders. Well, again, Bilbo could have run away. He's within walking distance of Dale or of Lake Town. Surely he could find Gandalf. It would all be over. He could go back to Born. He could know what to do. Well, what to do is save his friends. And so he goes out and he battles the spiders. He battles them. You can see the dwarves hanging there in their little cocoons wrapped up. They're not dead. They're just put to sleep. That's what spiders often do to their prey to keep it fresh. They just knock it out until they're ready to suck out the juices. But Bilbo fights them, and he kills and damages so many that they run away and they no longer bother him. And this is when he names his sword Sting, because of course wasps fight spiders, and wasps fight spiders with their stings. And so now he has his sword, his elven sword, which though it is small, it's really an elven dagger. It is just as effective as the great swords that Gandalf and Thorin wield, especially effective against spiders, and he fights very harsh against them. So, after rescuing his friends, they are still lost in the woods, and they're not even sure which direction the road is in, and they're wandering about, but they're turning now to Bilbo to be their leader and to help find the way, and so they start off through the trees. By the way, he now, at this time, reveals why he was able to escape the spiders while they were not, in that he has a magic ring. They haven't gone far into the forest when suddenly they are surrounded by elves because they are trespassing and they've broken the law. And so the dwarves are all captured, but not Bilbo. Bilbo puts on the magic ring, and then as the elves march the dwarves off, he follows them. All the dwarves, and we find out soon that Thorin has been captured by the elves. He marched into the middle of their party, he broke it up, he was knocked unconscious by the flash, and they collected him and took him back to the castle. The castle is a beautiful castle that a Hobbit would approve of. It's under a mountain, as are many of the castles in the story, elven, dwarf, and even hobbits, if you want to call Bag End a castle. But anyway, it's here at the edge of the forest is this beautiful palace of King Thingol, who is Legolas's father. And we meet Legolas in The Lord of the Rings. And remember, Gimli is Gloin's son. And so these people kind of, their lives come together again in the future. And Frodo may as well be Bilbo's son. So they're all going to get together in the future. But there they are in the midst of the heading in, taking the dwarves into the prison, and Bilbo slips in after them. Now, all the dwarves would have needed to do is to tell the elves what they were up to. But Thorin refuses to do it, and of course none of the other dwarves can disobey him, because Thorin is afraid that the Elf King will demand his share of the treasure, because not all of the treasure that Smaug has accumulated in the mountain is the dwarf treasure. Some of it is stolen from others, including from the elves. And so Thorin is being very stubborn and harsh, and the elves aren't concerned because elves live forever, and they figure the dwarves will crack sooner or later. But Bilbo is down inside the palace paying close attention to how the economy of the elves work, and he notices that every few weeks they send a bunch of empty barrels down the river. And then the barrels are loaded up by the people of Lake Town, who are very rich and prosperous, not at all like they're portrayed in the movie. And they're sent back up the river by raft, and have to push them up the river. But to get them down, all they pretty much do is throw them in the river, and they let them float down to the lake, where then the men of the lake gather them up into rafts and take them back, because barrels are valuable and expensive, especially watertight ones. And so Bilbo gets the keys, and because he's invisible, He gets the keys, he opens the locks, he puts his friends in the barrels that are empty, gets them all ready, and when the barrels roll down into the river, they roll down with them, and they're on their way down the river. And this is a painting by Tolkien himself, and Bilbo is riding on top. He's riding on top of one of the barrels, and that's kind of fun because later on, when Smaug asks him who he is, he talks about Sting, and he also talks about being a barrel rider, which is kind of sad for Lake Town because Smaug knows that the Lake Townese use barrels to do their business in, and he then blames what happens to him, and we'll talk about what that is, on the Lake Town people. And in a way, they are involved in it because, as we will see, Lake Town has helped the dwarves. Now, once again, just to diss on the movie, if you see the movie, you arrive in Lake Town, you think you're in the slums of some destitute, horrid place. Lake Town is extremely wealthy and beautiful, and all the people are happy and successful. And when they find out, when they open the barrels, and there are the dwarves, they welcome him like royal guests they are. The head man of the city actually gives up his throne to Thorin to sit upon, and he lets Fili and Kili, the princes, sit at either side of him because they are his nephews, and everybody's happy. And then when it gets there, they believe that this is the prophecy which will be fulfilled, that when the king under the mountain returns, the river will run with gold. And so they're so excited they haven't seen the dragon in a lifetime of most of the people there. Now, there is one person in Lake Town who's a little apprehensive. His name is Bard. Now, in Lake Town, he's not so important. But Bard is the direct descendant of the king of Dale. Dale used to be the big main city, and Lake Town was just kind of like a trading center, or almost a colony of Dale. But Dale, along with the kingdom under the mountain, fell when the dragon came. But Bard was among those who escaped along with the dwarves, and he's been living in Lake Town and working hard there. But he's not that important in Lake Town because he's not a Lake Towner. He is a Dalian. He is king of Dale, but he has not claimed that throne because there is no throne to claim. But now he too is becoming part of this story. So as I said, the people of Lake Town, they give them boats to cross the lake if. They actually take ponies around loaded with goods so that they can get them to the mountain. They're very eager for them to succeed. And they send them on their way up to the lonely mountain. They first approach the front gate, but the front gate is obviously barred. The entrance bridge is destroyed, and there's no way to get into the front of the mountain unless you can fly. And so Thorin remembers that there is a back door. And that back door is important because you remember the moon letters told them that the back door, the secret door, that on the certain day when the thrush knocks 3 times, the keyhole will be revealed. Well, they're even hoping they can find it without a thrush or without the moonlight, but they wait their turn. And they head up for that place on the back of the mountain. Smaug sleeping patiently below. This shows, both these pictures, the one I just showed you and this one, are also by Tolkien. And you can see here in the front of the lonely mountain, there are the ruins of Dale. And you can see the front gate, which is closed. But the dwarves have gone on up to the back gate, where they're looking for the keyhole. They wait, they camp there, and then one night, when they're almost ready to give up, because though they have food, they just have no hope, and suddenly there's the thrush, clucking on snails, and he knocks thrice, and the beam of light comes, as was promised, and reveals to them, boom, there is the keyhole. When they put the key in, which Gandalf gave them, which he got from Thrain when he was in the dungeons down there in Mirkwood of what they called the necromancer, who we will eventually find out is no one less than Sauron himself. But they opened the door. Okay, what to do now? Well, someone has to go in and see if Smaug is in there. They don't even know if the dragon's in there. They don't know what's going on. Well, of course, who's going to have to go? Well, that's why we brought you, burglar. That's what you're for. And you need to go. So Bilbo, besides, you have a magic ring. So Bilbo decides he'll go. None of the dwarves will go in with him except Balin. Remember, the one who didn't see him when he sneaked up on them when they were planning to leave him to die. And so Bilbo goes down and Balin goes with him for a good ways. But there comes a time when even Balin is not brave enough to continue. And so Bilbo continues all on his own. He comes down into, isn't that a cute little picture of him coming down the secret stairs? It's a very small opening, so small that Smaug doesn't even notice it, though for the last week or so, the dwarves have been banging and pounding on it with their picks and other things to try to get in, and it's been a little annoying. He's been wondering what's going on up there, but it's much too small for him to get up, and so he's been ignoring it. So Bilbo puts on his ring, and he sneaks down into the treasure chamber. And in this one great hall, Smaug has gathered together all the gold and jewels and precious things. There'll be golden dishes, and that's an important thing, including golden cups and statues and all kinds of unbelievable wealth from the ancient dwarf kingdom, which is enormous. Remember, dwarves love such jewel-encrusted gold and silver objects, but also from other places from around the world and from trade. That the dwarves were at the height of their trade and were a wealthy trading center of the world there in alliance with Dale. And they produced out of their mines all kinds of valuable materials that the whole world wanted. Plus, they made wonderful things. They could make wonderful, valuable things that everybody wanted to trade for. And so it's a very important trading center until, of course, the dragon comes. This picture is actually J.R.R. Tolkien's drawing of, you can see the bats in the belfry up there, and Smaug laying on his treasures. And over to the far right side there, there's Bilbo invisible as he's poking around in the treasure. Now, you'll remember from when we did the Beowulf that there was a dragon laying on a treasure in Beowulf, and somebody sneaked in and stole one of his cups. Well, Bilbo has to prove that he was down there, that he actually went there, and so he looks around and he finds this beautiful golden cup, and he takes it and he sneaks back up the corridor back to the dwarves, who are so delighted to see it, and their greed buttons are going raging. It's almost, they don't mind that the dragon is laying on top of all that treasure. Wow, that's going to be so exciting. But of course, they're afraid to go in. But at least this tells them that their treasure is still there, and Bilbo explains what he's seen. So they, but as Bilbo is waiting there, Smaug wakes up, or is gone. Bilbo is gone. Smaug wakes up and he looks around and he immediately realizes that one of his doodads has been taken. So he's that type of miser. He knows every penny of wealth that is his, and he bursts out in rage and anger, and he flies around the mountain. And the dwarves, just as Bilbo and the dwarves escape down into the mountain, just in time, and he flies around and checking, and he smashes shut the door. And so they're trapped down inside the mountain, but they can't get in because he comes back. So guess what? They send Bilbo down to treat with him. So this is a picture actually of Bilbo stealing the cup. I'm sorry I didn't advance that before, but we've heard that story, and so we'll go on. This time when Bilbo confronts him, the dragon is waiting for him, and he talks to him. And Bilbo, of course, lists all of his accomplishments, which are many, fighting the spiders, rescuing people in the barrels, and many other things he brags up. And the dragon is not stupid. He's very ancient and wise, and he's putting things together in his mind. And then, however, Bilbo begins to um, play on his vanity and talks about how beautiful his treasure is. But he says, I have heard that dragons have a tender underbelly. And Smaug just laughs, and he stands up, and you'll see that his entire belly is crusted in diamonds, which you know are the hardest thing in the world. And he's been sleeping on a heap of diamonds for 100 years, and he's just completely encrusted with diamonds, and he shows himself off in the flare of his flame. Except Bilbo notices that in his armpit, there's a spot he's missed. There's a hole right directly above his heart. And of course, fate is everywhere, as Gandalf, when we read the quotes, will explain. Fate is everywhere involved here, but Bilbo makes a note of this. And then Smaug is through with Bilbo, and he thinks he's figured out that Lake Town is involved, and so he starts to try to kill Bilbo, but he can't see him, and Bilbo rushes on up the tunnel. And even though Smaug sends fire squirting up the tunnel, it can't go as far as the dwarves are, and Bilbo, slightly singed, is rescued. I meant to point out, you know, that hobbits don't wear shoes. They have little furry feet, furry on top and calloused on the bottom. When I was a kid, we used to run around barefoot all summer till our feet got so harsh and callous that we could walk on puncture weeds, we used to call them. I think they call them goat heads here in Davis County, and they didn't even hurt. You just pick them out at the end of the day and have a great adventure. But hobbits always go barefoot like Zulus or Spartans, and so did we as kids. But Bilbo rushes up the corridor and escapes Smaug because he can't get in. But now he's out and he flies around, and it might be here that he smashes the entrance, but one way or the other, they're trapped down inside the mountain, but Smaug is gone. And where is he headed? He's headed for Lake Town. And he goes swooping down upon Lake Town. And in the long time that he's gone, a new friend, the dwarves have met a new friend. That's the crows and the ravens. Now, the crows are not their friends, but the ravens are. And there's an old raven, I think his name is Karak, and he comes and begins to bring messages to the dwarves. And he's the one that's going to tell them what's happening out there in the real world. And so eventually they will use him as their communication link. I think I've got this slide a little out of order, but you'll forgive me, and I'll tell you where it goes in. Eventually the dwarves do sneak down inside the mountain. Smaug's been gone a long time. Where's he been gone? Well, he has attacked Lake Town, and the Lake Towners try to fight him. Their boats scatter all over with their families, and the soldiers fight. But of course, it's a wooden city built up on pyres, and nothing burns like a wooden city. And Smaug is attacking it and destroying it, and they're shooting their arrows at his diamond-crusted belly, and it does them no good until the same thrush that knocked thrice flies to the shoulder of King Bard and speaks to him in Thrush-Alonian, which Bard, because he is a king, the king of Dale, he can understand. And he tells him what Bilbo told the dwarves. Now, Bard has a black arrow that's never missed, and he's always retrieved it. It's his favorite arrow. And so he fits the arrow to his bow, and at the exact right moment as the dragon wheels overhead, he sees the bare spot in his armpit, he lets it go, and down goes Smaug. This is Tolkien's drawing of the death of Smaug, which I think is beautiful, though you probably think you could do as well. Give it a try. This is a little more spectacular one because the dragon falls right on top of the burning city. The people escape, most of them, but the city is destroyed, and that's a great calamity. And of course, the city now blames the dwarves, but they assume the dwarves are dead. Now Smaug is dead, and so they figure that they're going to go and claim the treasure. Meanwhile, the dwarves have escaped from the Elf Kingdom, And the elves decide that they're going to go and see. Word spreads quickly. The ravens don't just talk to dwarves, they talk to elves too, and the elf king and his people know that Smaug is dead, and so they start on their march. And the crows, who are bad birds, they talk to people too, and they talk to the goblins, and the goblins soon find out, and they are still very angry that the great goblin was killed, and they hear that the dwarves have killed Smaug, and Smaug is dead, and so they begin their march towards the city. Now, I think it's important that we point out at this point, the men of Dale send to the elves for help. The elves could have ignored them, marched right up in, taken out Thorin and company, and had all the treasure, but instead they go and they help the men of Dale, the men who had in turn helped Thorin and his 13 companions, who in turn, again, King Bard is the one who has killed the dragon and made it possible for them to be down in the treasure. So when Smaug doesn't return, the dwarves go down into the treasure, and they also send their raven friend to the north, to the Iron Hills, because the raven says, there are armies coming here to take your treasure. And they go to Thorin's cousin, Dane, they call him Dane Ironfoot, who is also a great hero mentioned in the, I think it's in the Fellowship of the Ring, but he's surely in the appendices in the Return of the King, and he's in the Silmarillion, and he's a powerful king with a lot of people who were exiled from under the mountain, and they are coming back now, and he puts together a great army of dwarves. I don't know why they have him riding a pig in the movie version, and we are getting ready then for the Battle of 5 Armies. So we have the Dwarven army, which is several hundred dwarves. We have some thousands of elves and thousands of men. And we have 13 dwarves and 1 hobbit. And then we have the Goblin army coming. So that's the Battle of the 5 Armies. Now there, of course, there are going to be more. But they all then congregate. Well, Thorin and his friends have not wasted their time. They have fortified the entrance. So the bridge is already down, and so they build a wall. And whoever comes in is going to have to pay dearly. Bard and the Elf King ride up to the gates, and they explain to Thorin and his friends that they don't want all of the treasure, that they only want part of it. They figure, which is their due. The city of Lake Town has been destroyed. It needs to be rebuilt. Dale is destroyed. Much of the treasure inside the city belongs to Dale, but which now Bard is king of Dale. But the dwarves have been overcome, most of them, not all of them. Some are, including Balin especially, is ready to meet and say, we'll do it, we'll do it. But Thorin won't, and he's the king, and they have to obey. And so they're going to fight to the death to keep their treasure, even though they cannot win. When suddenly Gandalf shows up and says, you idiots, here you are fighting over treasure, and the largest army of all, the goblins, are marching down on you out of the north. The dwarf army has arrived, and so we've got Thorin here, we've got Bard and the Master of Lake Town here, and we've got Dane here, and then beyond them are the armies of the goblins. Well, as soon as the goblins arrive, boom, things have changed. Now, a few things have happened in the interim. Deep down inside the treasures, as they're looking around, and you can't help but want to look at them, they're so beautiful, Bilbo actually finds a stone. It's a beautiful jewel called the Arkenstone of Thrain, which Thorin has told everybody, you can have anything you want except the Arkenstone. That is mine. And arguably, the Arkenstone, the heart of the mountain, is in itself worth more than all the other treasure put together. It surely is to Thorin. Well, Bilbo is the one, surprise, surprise, or luck, or the will of God. Bilbo is the one who finds it. And he rationalizes to himself that he's been promised 1/14 part of the treasure, and so he's going to take this for his part of it. And so he puts it in his coat and keeps it quiet, even though Thorin keeps demanding about it and demanding about it. Thorin is grateful for all that Bilbo has done, and so he now gives him a gift of enormous wealth in and of itself. He gives him a mithril, which is true silver. This is the silver they mine in Moria. This is silver steel. This is the most valuable metal in the universe. And that's what they were digging in the mountains of Moria when they uncovered the Balrog. That's all in the Lord of the Rings. But he gives him this little elven prince's vest, little chain mail outfit, which Bilbo puts on to keep himself safe. He also gives him a crowned helmet, because he's like a prince now. And however, Bilbo is concerned that this whole thing is wrong. He agrees with Balin and the others that are right that Thorin is being crazy. So one night he sneaks out and he takes the Arkenstone to the Elf King. He admires and respects the Elf King, who is a wonderful, good person or good elf, but Bard and the head of the city are also there, and Gandalf is there. And so Bilbo produces the Arkenstone, and he says, you could probably get Thorin to relinquish a lot of the treasure in exchange for this. And so he offers it to them, and they're of course overwhelmed with its beauty and everything. So that's actually when they go to treat with the Arkenstone, and that's when Bilbo is kicked out of the mountain, and he goes to join the elven army that the goblins attack, and the real battle comes. And everybody is fighting. The elves and men are doing the best they can. Dane and his army rushes in to help them. They're all doing well. At the almost last minute, when it looks like they're going under, out of the gates of the mountain come charging Thorin and company down the mountainside and smack into the back over there. Albeit there are only 13 of them, they're a tough 13, and they're causing all kinds of difficulty, but it looks like it's going to fail anyway. And Bilbo is fighting and doing his best, though he's got his ring on, and screaming, when suddenly he sees coming through the skies the eagles. And the eagles are coming, and he's yelling, the eagles are coming, the eagles are coming, when a troll bumps him over the head, and he's out of it. So he doesn't know what happens next, but the next thing that's coming is Bjorn arrives in his bear shape. And so we have the eagles, we have Gandalf, who is as powerful as anything in the world, we have the armies of the elves, the armies of men, the armies of dwarves, and then all these goblins. Well, this is too much for the goblins, and there is a new king of the northern goblins who's even more powerful than the great goblin who's been killed. He was the one who killed Thane, the father of Thorin, I believe. Well, maybe it was his grandfather. He killed him inside the mountain of Moria when that battle was going on, and all kinds of terrible things are happening. And so all these things come to culmination, and in the battle, Thorin himself is mortally wounded, as are Fili and Kili, his two nephews, who would have inherited his crown after him. And so here is the beautiful moment in the story when Bilbo and Thorin are reconciled, and Thorin admits that he was wrong. He gives his gratitude and respect to Bilbo for making him a hero. He gives to him again the coat of mithril silver, and then he dies. He's buried with the Arkenstone in his hands. Of course, they mummify him so he never decays. And then he's got his sword, a magic elven sword, with him, and he's going to be buried in that condition. Dane then Dane Ironfoot becomes king under the mountain, because he is Thorin's cousin and the closest living relative, and they begin to rebuild it there. He shares out the treasure in fair amounts between the elves and the men. Everybody's reconciled, and I think the book will tell us, but it's way more than half of the goblin warriors of the north have been exterminated in this battle of the 5 armies. And so it's a great victory, though unfortunately some people we love and care for very much are dead. And everyone who dies in a battle, I guess even goblins, are loved and cared for by somebody. But now it's time for Bilbo to go home. And Tolkien says he did have some adventures, but they're probably not worth relating here. And Bilbo returns easily back home. Gandalf goes with him some of the way, and he returns back to the Shire. What's funny is when he arrives in the Shire, on the day he shows up there, they're having an auction. He's been gone a year, and so everybody figures that he's dead, and then all his property is being put up to sale. And his closest relatives, the Sackville Bagginses, are so excited. And this is Lobelia, who's the matriarch of the Sackville Baggins family. She's particularly interested in getting all of his possessions and eventually Bag End itself. But Bilbo shows up in time to shoo them all away and get most of his property back, though Lobelia gets his silverware, at least his spoons, of some of them, and there will be some fun things about that at the 11st birthday party of Bilbo before he goes off to Rivendell in The Lord of the Rings. But Bilbo returns to Hobbiton, his adventures not finished, because he can't wait to get back to Bag End. He sets up house there. Now he's 51. He's 51 years old. When he leaves to go to the Rivendell again, though he has many journeys and adventures with the elves that he doesn't write much about, but it's another 50 years. And in that 50 years, Frodo comes into the picture, and Sam and Merry and Pippin and all these are young dwarves who become friends of Bilbo, and he kind of adopts Frodo to be his, who is a Baggins and an orphan, to be his heir. But they live happily at Bag End, and Bilbo lives another 50 years at Bag End, and happy, enjoyable life, visited by elves and dwarves and wizards and other interesting people, and his reputation gets more and more quirky and more weird, but the young people think he's kind of exciting. And he has a great time, and he has the ring. And so that's very important, because that's going to be his great link into the future and into the Lord of the Rings. And so just as a kind of a final slide for our adventure together, and we haven't quite gone 40 minutes, so we can get you the quiz and you can do those other things, but here is a great picture kind of summing up those who survived, okay, and will be tying us into the next story from The Hobbit. Gollum is going to begin his long search for Bilbo and his ring. Bilbo is going to live happily at Bag End for the next 50 years, and Gandalf is going to go out into the world to try to figure out just what is this treasure that Bilbo has brought back, and how does it link into the story of the world. So I hope you enjoyed our quick thumbnail sketch of The Hobbit. I look forward to going over the quotes with you and telling you some other adventures in our next 2 times together. And I hope that this will be a satisfactory way to end our adventure. Please get your quiz answers in by the end of the week so that you can get your points. Thank you very much. Goodbye.